Johnny Carson really didn't like Madonna. Now we know why. The night that changed everything. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the king of late-night TV shows. He talked to over 22,000 famous people on his show, from presidents to movie stars, singers to regular people with cool talents. Carson was nice to all of them with his warm, funny way of talking like people from the Midwest do. He could make anyone feel good while keeping millions of people watching at home happy. This made him a TV legend. But the people who worked with him said there was one guest who came on his show that was really bad. A 1987 interview with Madonna that made Carson not just uncomfortable but really mad. Carson almost never got that upset on his show. "I've never seen Johnny that angry after a show," said someone who used to work on The Tonight Show and was there that night. He was always nice when the cameras were on, but after the show, he was really upset about what had just happened. It wasn't just that he was disappointed. He was actually disgusted. Tonight we're going to talk about the 10 reasons why this famous TV appearance made Carson so upset and how it changed the way he dealt with famous guests for the rest of his career. The 10 big mistakes. "It's nice to have you here." "Thank you." "Yeah, I'm fine." "Now that is a nice outfit." "Thank you. You design a lot." "You get in one." She turned every single thing into a dirty joke. Johnny Carson wasn't a person who got upset about everything. During his 30 years hosting The Tonight Show, he became famous for his sneaky dirty jokes, funny faces, and perfect timing with adult humor. Carson knew that grown-up jokes could be both smart and funny for everyone when done the right way. What made him mad about Madonna's visit in 1987 wasn't that she made adult jokes, but that she did it over and over again without being clever about it. Johnny liked smart dirty jokes, the kind where grown-ups understood but kids didn't get it, explained someone who wrote jokes for the show back then. What Madonna did was totally different. She turned almost every question, no matter what it was about, into a really obvious dirty joke. There was no skill to it, no clever build-up, no smartness, just the same crude stuff over and over. The people who were there when they filmed the show said Carson first tried to talk about Madonna's music, her movies, and how she was changing culture. Every time she changed the subject back to dirty topics with even more obvious references. You could see Johnny trying different ways to change the subject, remembered someone who worked on the show and saw the interview. He'd ask about her upcoming concerts. She'd make a joke about what happened behind the scenes. He'd talk about her recent movie. She'd turn it into an obvious dirty reference. After a while, he seemed to realize there was no way to steer this conversation back to safer topics. This one-trick approach made Carson frustrated, not just personally, but as someone who worked in TV. As someone who had spent decades learning how to have great conversations, he thought Madonna's repetitive focus on shocking people was not just wrong, but boring. "Johnny once told me that really good comedy needs variety," said a coworker who worked closely with Carson. He felt Madonna was basically telling the same joke over and over, and not even a very clever one. For someone who valued being witty and different as much as Johnny did, that was almost as bad as the dirty content itself. Carson's reaction wasn't because he was too sensitive, but because he was disappointed as a professional. It was like a master craftsman watching someone with huge talent choose the easiest, least creative way to get people's attention. Johnny had nothing against edgy humor. The writer explained what bothered him was lazy humor, using shock instead of real wit. He felt Madonna could do so much better, which made her reliance on the cheapest form of getting attention particularly disappointing. I may not be up on these things exactly, but what am I wearing?" "Yeah, if I went into a lingerie shop and I wanted to buy one of those for somebody." 2. She made the show about her, not the conversation. When The Tonight Show was at its best under Carson's leadership, it was like a perfect dance between the host and guest, a back and forth that made great TV through working together. The people who knew what happened said Madonna's approach broke this basic rule in ways Carson found really troubling. Johnny thought of The Tonight Show as a conversation, not a place for one-person speeches, explained someone who produced the show and worked closely with Carson. What made him mad about Madonna's appearance was that she didn't seem interested in actually talking back and forth. She treated the show like it was her personal stage to perform on instead of a conversation to be part of. Multiple people said this problem became obvious early in the segment. Carson would ask questions designed to start a real conversation, only to have Madonna respond in ways that stopped any real back and forth from happening. She completely ignored his setups, remembered someone who worked with guests and was there that night. Johnny would give these perfect conversation starters that could have led to interesting discussions, and Madonna would completely ignore them to say whatever she had already decided she wanted to say. It was like two people having completely separate conversations. This approach hit something Carson really cared about: the art of listening. Throughout his career, Carson had become famous for his ability to really hear what guests were saying and respond naturally, creating real moments instead of just going through predetermined talking points. Johnny believed the best interviews happened when both people were really present and responding to each other in the moment, noted the producer. With Madonna, he quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. She had her plan and was going to stick to it no matter what questions he asked or how the audience was reacting. What made this particularly frustrating for Carson, according to those who knew him well, was that it ruined the very thing that had made The Tonight Show successful for decades. The feeling that viewers were watching a real conversation instead of a fake performance. Johnny created this incredible feeling that you were just listening in on two interesting people talking. The producer continued, Madonna destroyed that feeling by making it obvious she wasn't there to talk, but to shock people. That basic disconnect made genuine entertainment impossible. Carson's response to this situation was one of his classic techniques, pulling back on purpose. According to those who watched the interview closely, he gradually stopped trying hard to create a connection and instead simply asked basic questions, letting Madonna's approach show itself. It was fascinating to watch Johnny basically step back and let her fail on her own, observe the person who worked with guests. Instead of working harder to save the segment, which was what he usually did, he made a rare decision to simply stop participating in her act. The result was uncomfortable television, but it showed a lot about both people. What would I call it? I mean, it's called a booyer. A booyer? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ah, that's nice. Sounds good, doesn't it? Yeah, it sounds great. Busier, obviously, to enhance the three, she embarrassed Carson on his own stage. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was completely in control of his TV show. The Tonight Show was his kingdom, a carefully controlled place where he decided the mood, speed, and limits of every conversation. The people who knew what happened said what made Madonna's appearance particularly awful was how it temporarily took that control away on his own stage. Johnny was the master of making difficult situations look easy, explained someone who directed The Tonight Show during this time. What viewers at home saw that night was something they rarely saw. Johnny Carson looking really uncomfortable and unsure about what to do next. That visible discomfort was a kind of public embarrassment he almost never experienced. Multiple people said Carson's body language during the interview said a lot. Viewers saw him leaning back in his chair, physically moving away from Madonna, and his famous smile looked more and more fake as the segment continued. Johnny had this way of quietly controlling interviews through how he sat, noted someone who operated cameras and worked that night. He would lean in when he wanted to show he was interested and supportive, lean back slightly when something wasn't working. With Madonna, he was practically pushing his chair away from the desk. For anyone who knew his visual language, it was a clear sign of extreme discomfort. Maybe most telling was Carson's eye contact or lack of it during the appearance. According to those watching closely, he increasingly looked toward Ed McMahon or the camera instead of directly at Madonna, something he usually only did when a segment was going terribly wrong. Johnny's eyes would look to the camera almost like a hostage sending a silent help signal, remembered the director. It was his way of telling the audience, "Yes, I know this is uncomfortable and I'm doing my best to handle it." For someone normally so in command, that visible discomfort was shocking to see. What made Carson most upset wasn't just his personal discomfort, but how Madonna's approach put him in an impossible work situation. As the host, he was responsible for keeping the show's standards while also treating guests with respect, a balance that became increasingly hard as the interview continued. Johnny was caught in this terrible situation, explained the producer. If he directly challenged Madonna's behavior, he risked creating an even more uncomfortable fight on live television. If he went along with it completely, he would be betraying the standards he'd kept for decades. There was no good choice, which is exactly why the situation was so frustrating for him. This public loss of control, however temporary, was reportedly one of Carson's most unpleasant work experiences. A rare moment when the unshakable host appeared genuinely shaken on his own legendary stage. "Coming here tonight, I don't see you very often on television except unless it's one of your specials. I saw you in Saturday Night Live once a couple years ago, and you were excellent in that. Thanks. It was fun. This is the first talk show I've ever done." "Really?" 4. She broke his unspoken rules of class and timing. Throughout his 30-year career, Johnny Carson developed a way of doing comedy and entertainment that balanced smart adult humor with basic respect for his regular audience. According to those who worked with him, this balance wasn't just a TV strategy, but something he really believed in professionally. Something that Madonna's appearance broke in ways Carson found really troubling. Johnny had this amazing ability to be both edgy and classy at the same time, explained someone who wrote for the show. He could make jokes about adult topics that were clever enough to make the smart people in New York and LA laugh while still being appropriate enough that families in middle America weren't uncomfortable watching together. It was an incredible tightrope walk that he did night after night. This approach wasn't about avoiding controversial topics, but about addressing them with a certain style and intelligence. According to those who knew him well, Carson believed viewers deserved humor that respected their intelligence instead of simply shocking them. Johnny wasn't against pushing boundaries, noted someone who produced the show and worked closely with Carson. What bothered him about Madonna's appearance was how she pushed them with what he saw as a childish "look how naughty I'm being" approach instead of with any real wit or insight. He found that basically disrespectful to the audience. Just as important to Carson was comic timing, knowing when to push a joke further and when to pull back. According to multiple accounts, Madonna's constant escalation without any sense of control or rhythm broke Carson's most basic understanding of how comedy should work. Johnny thought of comedy as music. It needed dynamics, pauses, build and release, explained the writer. Madonna just kept hammering the same aggressive note over and over without any variation. For someone with Johnny's smart understanding of comedic rhythm, it was like watching someone bang on a piano with their fists and call it a concert. What made Carson most upset wasn't the content of Madonna's comments, but their artistic crudeness, the lack of skill behind the shocking behavior. For someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of smart humor, this approach represented everything he had worked to raise his show above. Johnny had this saying backstage, "Anyone can get a laugh by dropping their pants, but that doesn't make good comedy," remembered the producer. He felt Madonna was basically taking the easiest possible route to audience reaction without any respect for the craft he had spent his life perfecting. This breaking of Carson's unspoken professional rules reportedly turned what might have been just disappointment into something closer to moral offense. A reaction to what he saw as not just a bad appearance, but a basic disrespect for television as an art form. "I got a scholarship to go to the University of Michigan, and he wanted me to do that. I can understand that. And I just said I wanted to go to New York and be a dancer, and that's not really something you can bank on. And so he wasn't thrilled about that. But I went anyways." 5. She ignored the audience's energy. One of Johnny Carson's most amazing skills was his ability to read an audience, to sense their mood, their level of interest, and their comfort with whatever was happening on stage. According to those who knew what happened, what particularly troubled Carson about Madonna's appearance was her obvious inability or unwillingness to make these same important adjustments. Johnny had this almost supernatural connection with the studio audience, explained someone who directed The Tonight Show. He could feel when a joke was working, when a segment was dragging, when a topic was making people uncomfortable, and he would adjust immediately, either leaning into what was working or changing direction from what wasn't. According to multiple accounts, Madonna showed none of this sensitivity during her appearance. As her sexually charged comments increasingly fell flat with the studio audience, she reportedly continued pushing in the same direction instead of changing her approach. Joe, you could feel the audience's discomfort growing throughout the segment, remembered someone who operated cameras and was there that night. These weren't overly sensitive people. Carson's audience loved smart adult humor, but they were responding with nervous laughter and sometimes complete silence to Madonna's more explicit comments. She either didn't notice or didn't care because she just kept escalating regardless of the reaction. This disconnect between performer and audience made Carson frustrated on both a professional and personal level. As someone who saw his relationship with viewers as sacred, he was disturbed by what he saw as Madonna's indifference to their experience. Johnny saw himself as the audience's representative, noted someone who produced the show and worked closely with Carson. He took their reactions seriously because he understood that without them, none of this mattered. Madonna seemed to be performing for some imaginary audience instead of connecting with the actual humans in the studio, and that broke something Johnny considered basic to good television. What made this particularly disappointing for Carson, according to those who knew him well, was that he considered audience awareness to be one of the most basic professional skills any entertainer should have. Johnny thought the ability to read a room was Entertainment 101. The producer continued, "It wasn't some advanced technique, but the absolute foundation of performing." To see someone of Madonna's stature seemingly lacking this basic skill, or worse, deliberately ignoring it, struck him as not just unprofessional, but almost unforgivable. Carson's response to this situation reportedly showed his own masterful audience awareness. Instead of directly challenging Madonna or creating an awkward confrontation that would have made viewers even more uncomfortable, he gradually pulled back from the conversation, allowing the disconnect between her approach and the audience's response to become increasingly obvious on its own. "Johnny basically stepped back and let the moment speak for itself," observed the director. "It was a masterclass in how to handle a difficult situation while still respecting the audience." The contrast between his awareness and her apparent lack of it couldn't have been more stark. "Well, I had it blonde for a while, and then after I did my movie, I had to bleach it so much so the roots wouldn't show 'cause my hair grows really fast. And that's a really long, somewhat hysterical process for me, 'cause I can't sit still." 6. She wasn't prepared. She was shocking just to be shocking. Johnny Carson approached every broadcast with careful preparation. According to those who worked with him, this wasn't just about memorizing questions or rehearsing bits. It was about bringing a level of thoughtfulness and skill to each segment that respected both the guest and the audience. Madonna's obvious lack of similar preparation struck Carson as a basic professional failure. Johnny valued guests who brought something meaningful to the conversation, explained someone who produced The Tonight Show during this time. Whether it was a well-crafted story, a genuine insight, or simply thoughtful responses to questions, he appreciated when people approached their appearance with the same seriousness he brought to hosting. According to multiple accounts, what Carson saw in Madonna's appearance was not preparation, but calculation, a strategy of shocking people that substituted shock for substance in ways he found both lazy and fake. Johnny could tell the difference between a guest who was naturally provocative and one who was using shock as a crutch, noted someone who wrote for the show. He had no problem with controversial opinions or edgy humor when they came from a real place. What bothered him about Madonna was that the shocking behavior seemed to be the entire point, instead of a way to express something meaningful. This approach struck Carson as particularly disappointing given Madonna's obvious intelligence and artistic abilities. According to those familiar with his reactions, he felt she was capable of much more meaningful engagement, but had chosen the easier path of simple shock value. Johnny saw Madonna as somebody with real talent and cultural significance. The producer continued, "That's why her reliance on childish, shocking behavior was so frustrating to him. It was like watching a gifted piano player choose to play chopsticks over and over instead of showing what they were really capable of." What made Carson most upset wasn't the shocking content itself, but its apparent purposelessness shock that existed for its own sake, instead of serving any larger point or genuine self-expression. Johnny had interviewed genuinely controversial figures throughout his career. Political radicals, boundary-pushing comedians, cultural revolutionaries, explained the writer. What made them different from Madonna, in his view, was that their shocking behaviors served some purpose beyond simple attention-seeking. They were trying to express something meaningful, whereas Madonna seemed to be merely trying to create a tabloid moment. This perception turned what might have been just disappointment into something closer to professional disdain. Carson's reaction to what he saw as a talented performer deliberately underperforming for easy attention instead of engaging in genuine communication. Johnny had a saying backstage. "Don't confuse attention with accomplishment," remembered the producer. He felt Madonna was pursuing the former at the expense of the latter. And for someone who valued substance as much as Johnny did, that was almost unforgivable. "Madonna, I hope you'll come back with us. I hope you had a good time. Thank you both for 7." She didn't play the game. The Tonight Show under Johnny Carson worked according to certain unspoken rules that created its special blend of spontaneity within structure. According to those familiar with Carson's approach, what particularly troubled him about Madonna's appearance was her obvious unwillingness to participate in this cooperative dynamic that had made the show successful for decades. Johnny saw The Tonight Show as a sort of game that everyone agreed to play together, explained someone who produced the show and worked closely with Carson. The host asks questions that create opportunities for the guest to shine. The guest responds in ways that allow for natural conversation and occasional humor. Everyone understands there's a format and purpose to the exchange, even while creating the feeling of casual conversation. According to multiple accounts, Madonna seemed either unwilling or unable to participate in this basic framework, instead attempting to force her own agenda on the segment without regard for the show's established format. The best guests knew how to work within Johnny's framework while still being authentic and occasionally surprising, noted someone who directed the show. They understood there was a rhythm to the show, when to tell a story, when to respond directly, when to let Johnny lead with a joke. Madonna ignored all those unspoken rules which made genuine entertainment almost impossible to create. This disregard for the show's established format frustrated Carson, not just personally, but professionally. As someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of the television interview, he saw Madonna's approach as not just difficult, but basically disrespectful to the medium itself. Johnny once told me that great talk show appearances were like great dancing. Two people moving together with a shared understanding of the steps, remembered someone who wrote for Carson. With Madonna, he felt like he was trying to waltz while she was doing an entirely different dance to entirely different music. There was no coordination possible. What made this particularly disappointing for Carson, according to those who knew him well, was that he saw this cooperative approach as helpful to guests instead of restrictive. The framework existed to help them present themselves effectively to the audience, not to limit their self-expression. Johnny created a structure that was designed to make guests look their best. The producer continued. When someone rejected that structure, they weren't just making his job harder. They were making it more difficult for the audience to connect with them. He found that frustrating because ultimately everyone lost in that scenario. Carson's response to this situation showed his own mastery of the very framework Madonna seemed to be rejecting. Instead of creating an awkward confrontation, he kept his professional behavior while gradually reducing his own investment in the segment, creating a clear contrast between his own cooperative approach and what he saw as her self-focused performance. Johnny basically demonstrated the right way to do television by continuing to play his role properly, even as Madonna refused to play hers, observed the director. It was a masterclass in professionalism under difficult circumstances, and it made her approach look all the more inappropriate by comparison. Somebody told me you were a waitress at one time. Yeah, but I wasn't really good. Yeah, 8. She was banned softly but firmly. Johnny Carson rarely banned guests completely from The Tonight Show. Throughout his 30-year career, he kept a reputation for being professional and courteous, even with difficult personalities, generally believing that a bad appearance deserved a second chance instead of permanent exile. Madonna, however, joined the small and notorious group of performers who were quietly but definitely removed from Carson's guest list following her 1987 appearance, a decision that said a lot about how deeply her approach had broken his standards for his program. Johnny didn't make a public announcement or tell the press Madonna was banned, explained someone who booked guests and worked on the show during this time. That wasn't his style. Instead, he simply told the booking team, "I think we've had enough of Madonna for a while." Everyone understood exactly what that meant. She wouldn't be invited back during his time as host. This quiet but firm approach to banning was typical of Carson's management style. According to those who worked with him, he preferred to handle such decisions privately instead of creating additional drama through public declarations. Johnny didn't believe in burning bridges publicly, noted someone who produced the show and worked closely with Carson. He understood the entertainment industry was built on relationships, and explicit public bans could create unnecessary problems for everyone involved. Instead, he simply made his wishes known internally, and the staff respected them absolutely. What made this ban particularly significant was how long it lasted. According to multiple sources, Madonna remained on Carson's Do Not Book list for the rest of his time as host, a period that stretched from her 1987 appearance until his retirement in 1992. It wasn't a cooling-off period or a temporary reaction, confirmed the booking coordinator. Madonna's name simply never appeared on our potential guest lists again. It was understood throughout the organization that her Tonight Show appearances ended with that 1987 interview period. This permanent exclusion put Madonna in rare company. According to those familiar with the show's booking practices, only a handful of other performers received similar treatment throughout Carson's 3 decades as host, most commonly for behavior that Carson considered not just difficult, but basically disrespectful to the program and its audience. Johnny was remarkably forgiving of nervousness, mistakes, or even occasional difficulties. The producer continued, "What got you permanently banned was behavior that showed a basic disrespect for what The Tonight Show represented." Madonna's approach that night apparently crossed that line decisively. In Johnny's view, the ban's significance extended beyond The Tonight Show itself. According to entertainment industry observers, Carson's disapproval could affect a performer's standing throughout the television landscape, as other shows often took cues from his judgments about which guests were worth the potential difficulties they might present. Johnny never told other shows not to book Madonna. That wasn't how he operated, explained the booking coordinator. But in that era, if Johnny Carson didn't want someone on his show, other producers and hosts definitely took notice. His standards were considered the gold standard of the industry. Over and over, yeah. And they compare you to Marilyn Monroe. Yeah. But that's just because we have the same hair color. That's where the comparison ends as far as I'm concerned. 9. She damaged the reputation of the show for that night. For 30 years, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson kept an amazing balance, smart enough for sophisticated viewers while remaining appropriate for middle American sensibilities. According to those familiar with the situation, what particularly troubled Carson about Madonna's appearance was how it temporarily damaged that carefully built reputation he had spent decades building. Johnny had created this remarkable television institution that families across America trusted, explained someone who produced the show. Parents felt comfortable falling asleep with The Tonight Show on, knowing their teenagers might still be watching, but wouldn't be exposed to anything truly inappropriate. Madonna's appearance temporarily broke that trust in ways Johnny found genuinely disturbing. According to multiple accounts, Carson was particularly concerned about how the segment would be seen by the show's core audience. Viewers in places like Nebraska, Carson's home state, Iowa, Ohio, and other regions where more traditional values were important. Johnny never forgot where he came from, noted someone who wrote for the show and worked closely with Carson. He understood the feelings of Middle America because those were his feelings too. He worried that Madonna's overtly sexual approach might alienate viewers who had loyally supported the show for decades. This concern showed itself in Carson's unusual request that the segment be heavily edited before it appeared in reruns and syndication. According to those involved in the post-production process, significant portions of Madonna's more explicit comments were removed before the interview was included in repeat broadcasts. Johnny rarely asked for major edits to interviews, remembered someone who supervised post-production and worked on the show. He believed in standing by what had aired live for better or worse. The fact that he requested significant changes to the Madonna segment said a lot about how problematic he found it. According to staff members, Carson described the segment as unshowable in its original form, an extraordinary assessment from someone who had presided over thousands of interviews spanning every conceivable topic and tone. Johnny wasn't concerned about personal embarrassment. The producer emphasized he was worried about The Tonight Show's brand and reputation. This thing he had built over 3 decades that represented a certain standard of quality and taste. He felt Madonna had temporarily damaged that brand in ways that required repair. This concern for the program's reputation showed something basic about Carson's character. His sense of responsibility not just to himself, but to the institution he had created, and the millions of viewers who had welcomed that institution into their homes, night after night, for decades. Johnny saw The Tonight Show as something bigger than himself, explained the writer. It was this American institution that meant something important to people across the country. Madonna's appearance felt to him like a violation of that institution's promise to its audience. And that's what he found truly unforgivable. Mr. Wells, before Mr. Wells, you make Wimpy look skimpy. 10. It was a turning point for Carson's patience with celebrity behavior. While Johnny Carson had encountered difficult guests throughout his career, the Madonna appearance marked a significant turning point in how he and his staff approached the booking and handling of celebrities, particularly younger stars who might prioritize shocking moments over meaningful conversation. After Madonna, there was definitely a change in our booking philosophy, confirmed someone who coordinated talent and worked on The Tonight Show. During this period, Johnny became noticeably more selective about which rising stars were invited on the program, especially those known primarily for provocative public personas, instead of significant bodies of work. According to multiple sources, Carson issued new guidelines to his booking team following the Madonna appearance, emphasizing the need for guests who understood and respected the show's format and standards. Johnny told us to focus on substance over sensation, remembered the talent coordinator. He wanted people who had something genuine to say, not just those looking to create a viral moment, though we didn't use that term back then. Madonna became the cautionary tale we referenced internally when discussing potential bookings. This shift extended beyond initial booking decisions to how guests were prepared before their appearances. According to staff members, pre-interviews became more thorough with clearer explanations of what Carson expected from guests in terms of conversational engagement and appropriate content. We became much more direct with managers and publicists about our standards, explained someone who handled guest relations and produced the show. If someone had a reputation for provocative behavior, we would explicitly discuss boundaries before booking them. If they weren't willing to work within our framework, the invitation would be withdrawn. Carson himself became more willing to end segments early if they were heading in directions he found inappropriate. A relatively rare move before the Madonna appearance, but one he employed several times in the years that followed when guests seemed unwilling to respect the show's standards. Johnny developed this very subtle signal to the control room, noted someone who directed the show. He would touch his tie in a certain way, and we knew that meant get ready to go to commercial. Early, it was his emergency exit plan for segments that were veering into Madonna territory. What made this shift particularly significant was how it influenced talk show culture more broadly. As the undisputed leader in late-night television, Carson's standards and practices were closely watched and often copied by other programs, creating a ripple effect throughout the industry. Johnny basically established that even the biggest stars needed to respect the format and purpose of the shows they appeared on, observed the producer. That might seem obvious now, but in that era of growing celebrity power, it was an important line in the sand. Madonna became the example no one wanted to follow. This legacy extended well beyond Carson's time as host, influencing how talk shows approach the balance between allowing celebrities to express themselves while maintaining program standards and format integrity, a balance that remains important to the genre today. In a strange way, the Madonna disaster ultimately strengthened The Tonight Show, reflected the talent coordinator. It forced us to articulate more clearly what made the program special and what kinds of guests could contribute to that vision instead of undermine it. Sometimes you don't fully understand your values until they're challenged.